you, Corrie and Jono, and thank you. It's really nice to be with you today. Thank you for your welcome. I was going to say thank you for the invite, but I know that most of you didn't have any say in that at all, so apologies to you. But I'm continuing your series Behind the Logo, and we're looking at the meanings behind some of the big companies and maybe the hidden meanings in their logos. And this morning we're looking at Apple, and so hopefully we'll have some slides up on the screen. And there is this big divide in technology world, isn't there, over whether you are an Apple person or whether you're not. Maybe you've got an iPhone or an iPad and a different type of computer, or maybe you are anti-Apple anything and avoid it at all cost. So I started my working life on Macs, and at one point I had 2 different part-time jobs, and half of it was on a Mac and half of it wasn't, and it really confused my fingers. I wrote this talk on a 9-year-old iPad, which auto-corrected the word Apple to having a capital letter every time. I do have a smartphone, but it is a hand-me-down. And I'm just not really driven by having the most up-to-date technology. Well, I don't say no to new things. I just can't justify it to myself if the old one hasn't broken. I'm not going to tell you my weekly screen time, because that would be very bad. My phone tells me that. But between my work computer and my phone, there's not a lot of time left, not even for sleep. And I won't ask for a show of hands on what your screen time is. You might have a love-hate relationship with technology in general. You might really love it. You might hate it. You might be somewhere in the middle. Now, as an archaeologist, when I think about technology, I think about things like this. My confession to you after the potatoes is that I really love flint. And I think it's because I was born in Suffolk, and there's something, flint is just amazing. So this is a Bronze Age dagger from Denmark. And now you're all sitting there going, a flint dagger, but you said it was Bronze Age. It is. It's actually a copy of a shape that you would never make in flint, but you would entirely make that it would be very normal to make in bronze. So in bronze, that kind of, the pointy end, the business end, would have been a really beautifully polished piece of bronze, and then they would have made an extra bit on the end to go into the handle, and the handle would have been made of wood or antler, and then it would have been covered in leather, and the leather would have been stitched. So this is made in the Bronze Age, in flint, and this is someone who this new material, this new technology is coming in, and someone's being like, yeah, I can do that. But I can do that in flint. And I can do all of it in flint. Because they've not just made the blade, they've not just made the handle, they have made the stitching. So if you look really carefully down the middle of the handle, you'll see this kind of V-shaped bit. So someone has flint-knapped the stitching on the handle of a Bronze Age dagger. Now this is technology, if you ask me. This is where humanity reached its peak. In my opinion. So when we think about digital, I think about digits. So this to me is a really interesting bit of technology. It's someone that saw all this new stuff coming in and said, no, we don't need that. What I've got is enough. What I've got, I'm really skilled at. What I've got is the right thing. Okay, I know that not everyone thinks about technology like that. And I know that technology plays a massive part in all of our lives, whether we want it to or not. Because how would we have got through the last 18 months if it wasn't for Zoom or Teams or the internet? It got us through the pandemic. For many months, my interactions with other humans was almost entirely through the internet. So technology is here to stay. But have we accepted it without really thinking about it, unlike the person who made this very beautiful flint dagger? So it's said that the Apple logo is based on that story that we had beautifully read to us this morning. Thank you, Corrie and Jono. The story in the Garden of Eden. And the idea was that God makes this perfect world, and it's full of plants and animals and eventually people. And God gives the people a garden to be in, and gives them this rule not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then Eve is tricked by the serpent, and she eats the fruit. And after the passage that we read today, we get the consequence of them breaking that rule. And the man and the woman are sent out of the garden, and they have to work hard to look after the earth. But the biggest problem really was the break in their relationship with God. Before that happened, they were together. It says that God came and walked with them. They had this close friendship. But the trust was broken. And that relationship wasn't the same again. And a spoiler here, that if you keep reading the Bible, we see how Jesus permanently fixes that broken trust. So it seems then a really strange choice for a logo when it's an apple, if it was an apple that Eve had. That could be a whole other debate. But it seems that this weird symbol of something that is the symbol of things that all went wrong is then used for apple. Maybe that will affect what you think about apple. So it's just this weird idea. You might have heard this story that we've read this morning before, you might not. And whether you've heard it for the first time this morning or the 50th, I hope it leaves you with some questions, because it definitely leaves me with a lot of questions, these first few chapters in Genesis. And I don't have time to get into all of my questions, but there's one thing in the passage that really struck me when I was looking at it and thinking about this idea of technology. So Corrie said she was using her real Bible, and I'm of the age where I actually forgot my Bible, and I brought it downstairs and put it on the table and then walked out the door without it. But fortunately, I did write all the passages down. So let's look at this passage that we've been thinking about in Genesis. The serpent comes along and he prods Eve with this question. Did God actually say that you shouldn't eat of any of the trees in the garden? And in chapter 2, God had said they couldn't, otherwise they would die. But why would they want to eat from that tree? It seems like they already knew the difference between what was right and wrong, because Eve knew that she shouldn't eat from that tree. So we're stuck in this kind of cycle of questions, aren't we? Eve knew it wasn't the right thing to do. She was surrounded with a garden full of other fruits, and yet she's there being tempted. Did God really say that you shouldn't eat from that? Why would she want to eat it? What benefit is there to it? What happened in that conversation with the snake that changed everything? It was such a short conversation. But what did that serpent say that made Eve start to question? I am not a Bible expert, and if you want to dig into some of these ideas that I'm going to talk about, then I can recommend various things. I use the Bema podcast, which I always recommend. It's very good. But so according to Bible scholars, there's something strange in that question from the talking snake. The snake doesn't actually finish the sentence. The snake actually says something like this. Even if God said, don't eat from any trees of the garden, and then he sort of tails off. And this sentence sort of depends where you put the emphasis. Even if God said don't eat, so what? That was it seems like the snake is saying. Even if God said don't eat, so what? Now imagine it's tomorrow morning, and Corrie and I have got a mutual friend, and that friend messages me and says, oh, Corrie said your talk stank yesterday. And my response would be, Corrie said that? Because I would feel hurt and betrayed, and I thought she was a friend, and she actually said something that was so hurtful. So my question, Corrie said that, makes it sound like I doubt she could have ever put those words out loud. Did she really say that? And what if something similar is happening in the garden? What if that talking snake's entire purpose is to make Eve start to doubt God? To make Eve doubt that God's words are important or that they're even true? Did he really say that? For Eve to start to think that maybe what God said is not as important as the way that she feels. And Rabbi David Foreman puts it like this. He says that God may have said to avoid the tree, but do you want to eat of it? God's voice instructs you not to eat of the tree. But on the other hand, another voice, your passions, your desires, beckons you to eat of the tree. So which voice should you listen to? The voice of God coming in words, or the voice that pulsates inside you, that animates your being? Which voice is Eve listening to? And suddenly, Eve starts to question everything. She questions whether God really has her best interests at heart. She questions whether what God is giving is enough to satisfy her. She's questioning whether the rest of the garden would really make her happy. Which voice does she listen to? God's voice, or that voice that's inside her? Whose voice is given more weight, is given more authority? Who does she think really has her best interests at heart, God or herself? Eve starts to doubt that relationship that she had with God. The trust is broken before she even takes that fruit because she started to listen to the voice inside her more than the words of God. Surely, Eve thinks, surely she knows what's good for her. She can make her own decisions. Even if God said don't eat, so what? And Eve moves from contentment of being in that place. She moves from that to discontentment so quickly. From, I have everything that I need, to, oh, but I just need that. And it doesn't take much for us to move from that place of contentment to that place of discontent either, does it? From, I have everything I need, to, oh, but I just need that. And that might be prompted by a question from someone else in your life. It might be a photo that someone puts online. It might be a comment on your social media feed. It might be someone that has better technology or newer technology than you do. It might be from someone other than your partner giving you the attention that you desire. It might be that decision that you make without ever taking it to God in prayer. And it starts so subtly. Just a little whiff of something that makes you question God's words. Did God really say? And then it's just this drip, drip, drip that makes you question whether God really does have your best interests at heart. Surely you know what you need. Maybe you know what you need better than even God does. Or maybe you're listening to a lie from a talking snake. It's really hard, and Eve would have been surrounded by fruit in that garden. The temptation of it, it looked so good. It smelt so good. It smelt so tempting. She would have been surrounded by the look and the smell of all of this fruit, and surrounded maybe by the buzz of the insects that are going in and out of that tree. Maybe there were other animals around, and they all looked at it good as well. And it just took that little prompt. And suddenly Eve is right in there. And she takes that fruit and, there she is with what was further away, and suddenly it's there. And suddenly it's there in her hand, and then it's there in her mouth, and the liquid is dripping out of her mouth and down her chin. Her fingers are sticky, the juice running down her arm. Before she properly realizes what she's doing, she is fully in it. It doesn't take much for us either, how quickly we can move from contentment to discontent. Eve's perspective changes. Did God really say that? But there's something else in Eve's perspective here that changes. Because where is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? It's in the garden. And we might say straight away that it's in the middle. And actually, the text is a bit unclear. It says in Genesis 2, verse 9, the tree of life was in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the text isn't really clear about whether both trees are in the middle or just the tree of life. But when that snake comes to Eve, she says in Genesis 3, verse 3, but God said, you shall not eat of the tree that is in the middle of the garden. Eve puts the tree in the middle of the garden. She's got that whole space to choose from. She could eat from anything else in there. And she puts that tree right in the center. She changes its position. Maybe it's all that she can think about. It becomes the center of a world, but that center wasn't the reality necessarily. Did God really say? And that can be the problem with technology. It takes us out of reality. It presents us with a different view of the world. We all know that people can't really look that good without a filter, surely. Their muscles can't be that big. But we want that look. We know that no one's life is as good as their Instagram feed, where children don't cry and dogs don't poo and no one's ill unless they look really beautiful being ill and gardens never get weeds and every meal is worth a Michelin star. We know that, but we want it. And what have we put into the middle of our lives? What have we changed perspective on? I think if someone came and watched me for a few days and studied the things that I spend my time looking at, the things that I spend my time checking, the things I spend worrying that I haven't got with me at the moment, my phone would be pretty high up on that list. Maybe there are things that I've put into the middle of my life that don't deserve to be there. Maybe I've lost sight of what is enough. It's really hard. The temptation of technology is really powerful. It's completely set up to be tempting to us. Those little red notification symbols, that gentle ping of an exciting new message coming in, the fact that my phone is so useful. Who ever thought that a wallet could be a camera? Or that my music player could be a map? Technology has been made to manipulate us, and that's the problem, is that then we put it in the middle of our garden. Maybe it's something different for you. Maybe there's something else that you've put into the middle of your garden. Something that says that what you have, that who you are, is not enough. Just that little voice that whispers to you, don't you think you should listen to your own desires? You can stop working when you've just made that amount of money. You can stop working so hard when you've got that bigger house. It'll be all right when you've got more friends or that person that you really desire. And maybe we have spent our time going after the wrong fruit. In the Bible, in the New Testament, there's some verses that talk about the fruit that Christians should be focusing on. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And when it comes to those temptations that get in the middle of our garden, technology or otherwise, we need self-control. We need self-control to limit that voice of our own desires and to listen to God. Now, your use of technology might be something that you struggle with. How can you practice self-control there? What limits do you need to put in place to help you to practice self-control? Do you need to put time limits on particular apps? I've done that for myself. So there are some things that I just can't keep looking at all day. You might make it a rule in your house that phones can't be used in bedrooms or at the meal table, and that rule has to be for everybody, not just the youngest people in the family. But what have you put in the centre of your garden? Where do you need people around you to pray for you, to help you to find God's voice? Maybe your temptations and desires are for something that's not around technology. But where do you need to practice self-control? Where do you need to have a good look at the voices that you're listening to? What is in the middle of your garden? And what fruit is it producing in your life?